Professor Wolff, the famous economist, drops by today to talk about the scam of Trump's low unemployment rate. It's fascinating. And we get into a few other areas that I think you'll find interesting, too. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. On the line with us is our old friend, I almost called him a congressman, Professor Richard Wolff. We just had a congressman on, I'm sorry. Professor Wolff is an economist. He's the co-founder of Democracy at Work. DemocracyAtWork.info is the website. He's the author of numerous books, including Understanding Marxism, his latest Understanding Socialism, rdwolf.com and DemocracyAtWork.info, his websites, and you can tweet him at Prof. Wolff, and there's two F's in Wolff. Professor, welcome back.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
So I shared with you a kind of eccentric newsletter I get. I subscribe to this investment newsletter called Aiden Forecast, and they've got a guy who does a daily little rant. And he was talking about how, in his opinion, and his opinion tends to be a little on the right, but in any case, Chuck was writing about how he thinks that GDP and unemployment, that the numbers that are being cited by the Trump administration do not reflect the reality of the economy, first of all. And secondly, that they might even actually be cooking the books beyond the extreme to which the books are normally cooked. Bernie Sanders has been talking about this for years, that we're using the wrong measure of unemployment, we're using the wrong measures for inflation and things like that. What are your thoughts on all this?
It is. You're quite right. It is an old debate. Economists have been, from the right and the left, I might say, have been skeptical about the statistics, both on theoretical grounds, but also on the grounds that political interference by the people who sit on top of the government pyramid to try to get reelected by cooking the books is fairly obvious. Some of that is going on most of the time. It's very hard to know exactly how much or how big of an impact it has. Having said all of that, one of the points that Aiden makes that is very valid is a very simple idea. If you're going to get record levels of unemployment low, that is, you're giving large numbers of people some sort of job, then it is likely that you're going to have to see a kind of extraordinary rate of economic growth, because unless the economy is growing pretty heftily, it's not going to be able to absorb simply the new people, the teenagers growing up and entering the labor force as they become adults. If you're going to keep the people who are working and accommodate the new entrants to the labor force, well, you have to be growing at a certain rate. The actual GDP growth in this country, which is itself a debatable measurement, hasn't been growing very quickly. President Trump promised he would make it do that, but that promise, like so many others, hasn't worked out. He promised with the tax cut in December of 2017 that it would really solve the problem of economic growth. He used numbers like 3 to 5%, which for the United States would be stunning achievement. He didn't get that achievement. He didn't get anywhere near it. Our basic growth rate over recent years hasn't changed under Mr. Trump and is in the middle between 2 and 3%. To give you an idea of what that means, in China, which has the worst economic growth rate in 25 years this year, they're getting 6.5%, which is 2 to 3 times what we get. So it's very hard to account for low unemployment numbers, record lows, that Mr. Trump boasts about, when you don't have the economic growth that normally would be necessary. And Mr. Trump never even acknowledges this contradiction, let alone offers an explanation. So the letter you sent me is quite correct in saying, wait a minute, at the very least you have to account for this weird result rather than pretending it isn't there.
Could it be that you've got more people working part-time jobs, fewer people working full-time jobs, and those people are all being counted as employed?
Yes, although my guess would be, since there are some numbers about part-timers and things like that, I would guess it's something else. And this is troubling, to say the least. What we've seen, not just over the last 10 years, where it's been bad, but over the last 25, is the end of good jobs. for millions and millions of Americans. Jobs that pay well, jobs where the real wage goes up each year, acknowledging that you're better at your job this year than you were last year, et cetera, et cetera. We have seen the benefits that go with jobs being cut, particularly pensions, but others as well. And finally, we've seen the loss of secure jobs and the rise of insecure jobs, usually covered with euphemisms like the sharing economy or the gig economy, anything other than facing what it is, which is insecure jobs. Well, the end result of all of that, especially after the crash of 2008, when millions lost their jobs, was that working people have lost their savings if they had any, can't go to their friends and relatives for more help because they've already been doing that. So here's what they have to do. They basically have to go to work somewhere for virtually anything, which is why we have so many part-time or poorly paid jobs, even if they're full-time, why we have a movement for $15 minimum, which doesn't get you much beyond the poverty line anyway, and millions don't even have that. So here's my guess. We are not growing the economy. We are seeing the small number of very wealthy people begin to have an army of servants. That's where the work is growing. Here in New York City, where I live, we now pay people to do your shopping for you, lots of them, to walk your dog, to clean your house, to take care of your pets. I mean, it's extraordinary the number of jobs that really don't add to the wealth of our society. They're really in the form of personal service that very wealthy people can afford and that the rest of us are now forced more and more to go take. That might help explain why we have a lot of people working at awful jobs and we don't see the economy as a whole growing.
I saw a statistic in the Financial Times over the weekend, and I'm doing this from memory, but I think I'm remembering it right. You're probably familiar with it. They said that as I recall, 44% of the American workforce earns less than $18,000 a year. If that's the case, or if it's 40%, it's maybe. But if that's the case, then what you're suggesting, it sounds to me, could be redescribed as we are seeing unemployment go down because more and more people are taking jobs of desperation.
Absolutely. There's no question that that's happening. The only question is that happening on a scale big enough to account for some of these big macro numbers that he's rightly pointing to about this contradiction between GDP growth on the one hand and low unemployment. It could be explained, we just don't know enough, but it could be explained by what we know is going on, namely this transition, which is upsetting so many Americans on the left, but also on the right. This reality that you keep hearing the unemployment is low, but your own circumstance is awful because, you have a job perhaps, but it pays poorly, it's insecure, you're constantly anxiety-ridden about this job, about the benefits being taken away from you, how in the world you're going to cope with your old age without a real pension. And now, since you're compensating by borrowing too much money, you have the added anxiety of imagining what will happen to you if your job is interrupted and you can't make the necessary payments. You're producing a society that is broken into the small minority that are super rich and a vast majority who, despite all of the verbiage, see their economic situation shrinking around them and become more and more upset, understandably.
So, wow, it's like the return of peonage. Two other quick questions. We just have 2.5 minutes here before we're going to hit a break. What's the impact of boomers aging out of the marketplace? And I guess the sub to that is, how many of them are not aging out of the marketplace? I'm over 65 and I'm still working. And secondly, if Trump starts pushing Powell to either hold or raise interest rates on the assumption that he's not going to be the new president, is it possible that he could provoke an economic crash that happens right after the election if we get a Democrat winning?
Well, let me answer both of them. It might have been a different story if the elderly, the people reaching retirement age 65 and above, had behaved like previous generations and retired, at least in roughly comparable numbers. They can't do it. Part of the fact that Social Security is so inadequate to live on, part of the fact that so many people are carrying levels of debt that undermine whatever Social Security might have intended to do, they're not retiring. They're going back to work, even if they have to take the job as, Walmart greeter or something like that pays awfully. And, of course, the longer the older folks stay in the job market, the harder it is for the new young people coming in to find work, which is exactly what then exacerbates low-wage jobs because the new entrants are desperate and the old people are desperate, neither of them able to escape from the situation. And as to your other point, absolutely. If Mr. Trump were to decide that he's losing, or even worse, if he decides, having won, if he does, that he can't run again, so he might as well do something different, you could see all kinds of shifts coming because of what this guy does and what the Republicans behind him are willing to do. But no matter what happens, the deluge is coming. It's like King Louis in France at the time of the French Revolution made that famous comment, after me comes the deluge. Yeah, Mr. Trump, if he were honest, would be telling us there is going to be a doozy when the next economic downturn comes. You put that together with these unparalleled levels of debt in our economy, and there is no limit to how bad this might get.
Well, he has come right out and said if a Democrat is elected president, there's going to be a huge economic crash. I think he might be planning on setting that up.
Yeah, you could see that a guy like that would be so wigged out by losing an election. I mean, he lost the last one and literally had to pretend he didn't. So, yeah, who knows what he might do. But the sad reality is, even if he didn't, you've set up a situation of overused debt that could come back to haunt anybody who becomes the next leader.